Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're kicking off a brand new series, one that takes a deep dive into one of the most catastrophic events in human history, the Second World War. But before we get to the Blitz, Pearl Harbor, or D-Day, we need to understand how it all began. The war didn't just appear out of nowhere in 1939. It was the culmination of a decade of rising tensions, failed diplomacy, and aggressive expansion. So, in this first part, we're winding the clock back to the early 1930s, specifically from 1931 to 1934, to trace the very first steps on the dark road to World War II. Our story begins not in Europe, but in Asia. It's September 1931. The world is still reeling from the Great Depression, which has sent economies into a tailspin. In Japan, the situation is particularly dire. The country lacks natural resources, and its economy is heavily dependent on exports. With global trade collapsing, Japan's military leaders, who held immense power, saw a solution: expansion. They believed that by creating a vast empire, Japan could secure the resources it needed and dominate Asia. Their eyes were fixed on a region right next door, Manchuria, in northeastern China. Manchuria was a prize. It was rich in resources like coal and iron, and it offered a huge landmass for settlement. Japan already had a significant presence there, including an army, the Kwantung Army, stationed to protect its railway interests. On September 18, 1931, a section of this Japanese-owned railway near the city of Mukden was blown up. The Japanese military immediately blamed Chinese nationalists and used this as a pretext to launch a full-scale invasion of Manchuria. This event, known as the Mukden Incident, was almost certainly a false flag operation, staged by the Japanese army itself to justify the invasion. The Chinese forces were overwhelmed. By early 1932, the entire region of Manchuria was under Japanese control. But Japan didn't just annex it. Instead, they created a puppet state called Manchukuo, installing the last emperor of China, Puyi, as its symbolic ruler. In reality, Manchukuo was completely controlled by the Japanese military. So, how did the world react to this blatant act of aggression? Well, not very strongly. The international community, led by the League of Nations, the predecessor to the United Nations, was faced with its first major test. China appealed to the League for help. The League responded by sending a commission. The Lytton Commission, as it was called, took months to investigate. Its final report, published in late 1932, was a masterpiece of diplomatic fence-sitting. It condemned the Japanese invasion but didn't call for any real action, like military intervention or even significant economic sanctions. The report simply recommended that Japan withdraw and that Manchuria become an autonomous state under Chinese sovereignty. Japan's response was one of defiance. In early 1933, instead of withdrawing, the Japanese delegation dramatically walked out of the League of Nations. This was a massive blow to the League's credibility. It showed the world that a major power could act aggressively, violate international law, and face virtually no consequences. The message was clear: might makes right. This act of appeasement sent a dangerous signal to other expansionist powers, particularly in Europe. Someone was paying very close attention, and that someone was Adolf Hitler. While Japan was carving up Manchuria, Germany was in the midst of its own political turmoil. The Weimar Republic, Germany's democratic government, was weak and unstable, crippled by the Great Depression and the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. Hitler and his Nazi party exploited this chaos, promising to restore Germany's national pride, rebuild its economy, and reclaim its lost territories. Their message resonated with millions of desperate Germans. On January 30th, 1933, a date that would change the course of history, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Many in Germany and abroad naively believed he could be controlled, that the responsibilities of power would moderate his extreme views. They could not have been more wrong. Hitler moved with lightning speed to consolidate his power. Just a month later, the Reichstag, the German parliament building, was set on fire. The Nazis blamed the communists and used the fire as an excuse to pass the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended basic civil liberties. and allowed for the arrest of political opponents. This was the beginning of the end for German democracy. Within months, Hitler had established a one-party dictatorship. Other political parties were banned, trade unions were dissolved, and the first concentration camps, like Dachau, were opened for political prisoners. His intentions, laid out years earlier in his book Mein Kampf, were now becoming state policy. He spoke of Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people, which meant expanding eastward into the lands of Slavic peoples. And although that he needed to break free from the constraints of the Treaty of Versailles. Like Japan, Hitler decided to test the international waters. In October 1933, he announced Germany's withdrawal from both the League of Nations and the World Disarmament Conference. The conference had been an ongoing effort by the major powers to reduce their military arsenals. Hitler claimed that Germany was being treated unfairly, that other nations weren't disarming as they had promised. By withdrawing, he was signaling his intention to rearm Germany, a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Again, the international response was weak. There were verbal condemnations from Britain and France, but no concrete action was taken. They were hesitant to provoke a confrontation, hoping that Hitler might still be reasoned with. This policy of appeasement was driven by several factors. Firstly, the memory of World War I was still fresh and horrifying. No one wanted a repeat of that slaughter. Secondly, the Great Depression meant that countries like Britain and France were focused on their own domestic problems and had little appetite or resources for a foreign military adventure. Thirdly, many in Britain felt that the Treaty of Versailles had been too harsh on Germany and that some of its grievances were legitimate. They believed that if they made some concessions to Hitler, he would be satisfied and peace could be maintained. But Hitler was not a man to be satisfied. Every concession was seen not as a gesture of goodwill, but as a sign of weakness to be exploited. His actions in 1933 set the stage for the dramatic escalations to come. Meanwhile, other pieces were moving on the European chessboard. In Italy, the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, who had been in power since 1922, was watching Hitler's rise with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. He was the original fascist leader, but Hitler was quickly becoming the more dynamic and dangerous figure, while Mussolini also had ambitions of expanding Italian influence, particularly in the Mediterranean and Africa. He was initially wary of Hitler's aggressive plans for Central Europe, which could threaten Italy's own interests. The year 1934 saw tensions escalate further. In Germany, Hitler continued to tighten his grip on power. In June, he carried out a brutal purge known as the Night of the Long Knives, where he had hundreds of his political rivals and even allies within his own party murdered. This shocking act of violence eliminated any remaining internal opposition and solidified his absolute control. Just 2 months later, in August 1934, German President Paul von Hindenburg died. Hitler seized the opportunity, merging the offices of Chancellor and President to become the sole leader of Germany. The Führer with his power now. A salute at home, Hitler turned his attention abroad. His first major foreign policy gamble focused on his home country, Austria. The Treaty of Versailles expressly forbade a union, or Anschluss, between Germany and Austria. But Hitler, an Austrian by birth, dreamed of uniting all German-speaking peoples under one Reich. In July 1934, Austrian Nazis, with support from Germany, attempted a coup. They assassinated the Austrian Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss, in the hope of seizing power and paving the way for France. This time, however, Hitler's plan failed. The coup was poorly organized and was quickly suppressed by the Austrian military. More importantly, it was met with a strong international reaction, primarily from an unexpected source, Benito Mussolini. Mussolini saw an independent Austria as a crucial buffer state between Italy and an expanding Germany. He had no desire to share a border with Hitler's powerful Reich. In response to the coup attempt, Mussolini mobilized for Italian army divisions and sent them to the Brenner Pass, the border between Italy and Austria. It was a clear message to Hitler: back off. Faced with the prospect of a military confrontation with Italy, which Germany was not yet ready for, Hitler disavowed any involvement in the coup. The attempt on Austria was a failure, a temporary setback for Hitler. But it was a valuable lesson. It taught him that he needed to proceed more cautiously and that he needed to ensure his potential enemies were divided. He realized he couldn't take on everyone at once. He needed to isolate his targets and if possible, turn these rivals into allies. The failed Austrian coup directly led Hitler to seek a closer relationship with Mussolini, an effort that would eventually lead to the creation of the Rome-Berlin axis. So, as 1934 comes to a close, let's take stock. The system of collective security envisioned after World War I is crumbling. Japan has successfully conquered Manchuria and walked away from the League of Nations with impunity. Germany, under Hitler, has become a totalitarian dictatorship, has also left the League, and is openly preparing to having already tested the waters with a failed attempt to annex Austria. The major democratic powers, Britain and France, are paralyzed by fear, economic hardship, and a misplaced hope that they can appease the dictators. The road to war is being paved, brick by brick. The aggression in Manchuria and the rise of Hitler are not isolated events. They are connected, each one emboldening the other, each one chipping away at the fragile peace. The world failed to stand up to aggression when it was small and distant, and now a far greater threat is brewing in the very heart of Europe. The events of these early years set a dangerous precedent, creating a world where international law was ignored and military force was seen as the primary tool of foreign policy. And that's where we'll leave it for today. We've seen the first cracks appear in the world order. In the next part of our series, we'll look at the years 1935 to 1937, a period where the aggression intensifies. We'll see Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia, Hitler's remilitarization of the Rhineland, and the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, a brutal dress rehearsal for the World War to come. The pace is about to pick up. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting and want to follow the rest of this journey to war, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have notifications turned on. Let us know your thoughts on this period in the comments below. See you in the next one.